Hello, I'm Shieldwall100 and today I'm going to be taking a look at and reviewing the Strength and Honor rule set, written by Mark Backhouse and published by Rice Press. There's a part of the old HBO Rome series that always kind of struck with me. Not that part, you degenerate, where the Battle of Philippi, fought between two opposing Roman factions, becomes a confused muddle. On one side, an inexperienced Octavian addresses Mark Antony and asks, "What is happening?" To which the latter says, "I have no idea." And even though I'm aware that the real battle was a trifle more nuanced than the depiction, it was nice to have some validation that ancient battles were only controllable by a general in overall command, up to a point. Strength and Honor is an attempt to reflect a battle from the perspective of such a high level, where your individual playing pieces are forces of the magnitude of an entire Roman legion at a time, or a whole tribal contingent of barbarians. Playable at just about any scale, the author clearly angles the player towards the hitherto poorly explored regions of 2mm tall units. So what we are looking at are entire formations on element bases, something that in my opinion helps to visualise why the rules are the way they are. At such a zoomed out perspective, differences in equipment, armour and even the exact number of men represented, points of historical debate to this day, don't really matter. At such a level of command that the player is in this rule set, you'll be leaving the management of which cohorts need to be rotated out to the Legion Centurions. Rather too many other Wargames rule sets try to have the player manage the facings and keep track of equipment of individual units of legionaries, whilst also maintaining that they can adequately scale up to any size of battle the ancient world could encompass. I'm looking at you, Hail Caesar. However, Strength and Honor leaves the nuance out and assumes a staff of able subordinates has the minutiae covered, allowing the player to command in broad strokes. Which, of course, as a wargamer with years of experience behind me, begs the question of, where's the game then? Well, in this review, I'll be trying to let you know where it is, and how it's a game of measured risk-taking and bold gambles. So, I've explained the perspective of the rules, but what do you get in the Strength and Honor book itself? Well, you obviously get a comprehensive rules section, clearly laying out the various parts of the game, with diagrams for manoeuvring your units, which are very important that ancient games get this right. Every section has diagrams and examples to help you on your way. There's even a brief section on campaigns, so if linked games are your thing, then you're covered. Following this, there are army lists for most of the common participants of the period, which, if you aren't already aware, covers the period when the Roman legions adopted the cohort system, notionally the Marian reforms, through the Caesarian period and onto about the end of the 2nd century AD. It's a tiny bit fuzzy. Finally, there are 10 historical scenarios based upon real battles, some of which look like they will give a good introduction to the rules, and others that show you how to really stretch the rule set's legs a little bit more. There are also a few pages containing setback and disaster cards that you can cut out if you desired. However, I was able to procure a PDF of these online, so I didn't have to mutilate my book. Overall, it's a complete package for you to then either go out and start a collection for the set, or to adapt your existing models for a new game. Addressing the game and the manner in which you as a player shape the outcomes, even before deployment you have a brief part to play, as you assign your commander's attention to various aspects of your battle plan. This is represented by you having a number of command points that you can assign to attack, defense, movement and strategy, as well as some for your general himself. You can allocate the points to cover for deficiencies in your force, or to maximize advantages, or to aid you in the achievement of a scenario goal. The choice is yours. You don't tend to have many points, so choose wisely, but don't fret too much. It's a nice little way to reflect pre-battle auguring and command tent discussions, but doesn't take significant time away from setting up the battle. The gameplay itself is a series of very straightforward concepts. The battle surface itself works on a grid system, with units taking up 2 spaces each across. This greatly aids the speed and decision-making processes within the game, as at this scale, even with 100% honest players in a friendly game, a little mismeasurement or poor estimation could have considerable ramifications, and that's clearly not what the author wanted to be factors in whether or not a player loses a battle. It's a you go, I go system, with one player taking it in turns to activate units in their army after another. However, there is a twist, and this is where things get very interesting. Taking actions comes with an inherent degree of risk, whether they be moving, charging, fighting, etc. Actions that are more difficult to undertake or less likely to succeed in the tumult of an ancient battle are more likely to fail, represented by either more tests against your unit's characteristics or tougher modifiers. Failure in performing actions is likely to result in a reversal of fortune, whereupon not only does the unit fail in whatever it was attempting to do, but then plays switches to the opponent immediately, who can then begin their turn anew until they either activate all of their units or fail in an action themselves. In certain lower levels of command, this would not really make an awful lot of sense, but it fits the scale of strength and honour in that the games play out like you're reading one of the accounts of the pivotal battles of the era, and truly reflects the swings in initiative that the great leaders of the time were able to take advantage of. Although certainly not an entirely new concept in historical wargaming, I had an epiphany whilst reading the book where my head snapped up and I thought, this is just like Blood Bowl. Now, that's not a dig. Blood Bowl is perhaps one of the enduring gems in Games Workshop's crown. I just wasn't expecting to find the game of fantasy football in my epic scale rules for ancient battles. Now, if you take combat for example, you work out the strength for each side, including the unit's base value, then apply modifiers for things like support, flanking, etc., the usual fare. If the strengths are equal, the player whose turn it is and initiated the activation rolls a single die with 6 sides and reads the results off a table, which will determine the success of their attack. If there's a disparity between the strengths of the units in either direction, then multiple dice are rolled and the stronger side picks which individual result to apply. This process is the same as Blood Bowl, and even the combat results charts for the die rolls bears a passing resemblance to that game. Rolls that result in the activating unit being forced back in some way constitute failed actions and reversals of fortune as described earlier. Just like bloody Blood Bowl. Again, this is not a bad thing. You get a very intense experience using this system, and it creates a game where you as a player are incentivized to play out, quote, safer actions first in order to get the most out of your turns. However, the things you feel you really cannot ignore may very well run the higher risk. Will you risk neglecting a crumbling part of your battle line in order to press the advantage that could just break the enemy? Here's your game in making these high-level decisions rather than being bogged down in details. Further unpredictability can be found in the manner in which victory is determined. As your army starts to suffer attrition or your plans start to break down, you will accrue setback and disaster cards. Generally, setbacks are for straightforward knocks to your elan, whilst disasters represent entire units. Don't forget that these might be whole legions, being up and removed from the board, or your general meeting an untimely end. It's all bad stuff. All of these have numbers on the reverse, setbacks markedly lower than disasters, and are kept secret in a disconcertingly growing pile next to you, the player. Now, in Strength and Honour, armies don't know when they are beaten intrinsically, the opponent has to call them out on it, and by the player declaring homunculus est during their turn. The declaration made, the accrued cards are then revealed, and the total on the cards compared to the army's breakpoint. If the total beats the breakpoint, then the game is over. If not, then the player who is forced to reveal picks a card, most logically the highest number, to remove from his pile and play continues. Therefore, as both players are gaining cards, both will be feeling the pressure to call on their opponent before they themselves have to reveal their score, but with the knowledge that being premature will lead to disappointment. That's a great way to introduce the burden of choice to a part of the gaming that doesn't traditionally feature much. The presentation of the book, as is the tendency with modern rule sets, is very good indeed. You can tell that it has the weight of the 2 fat larders behind it at Rice White's Press. The print is big, the diagrams clear, and the photography inspirational. I'm aware of a generation of wargamers that would count these things as negatives, but thankfully these are for the main part either dead or sufficiently old that their opinions can be safely discounted. Of course, one needs to make sure that pretty presentation doesn't blind one to poor rules, but I've certainly had more experience of good rules being handicapped by unclear wording and the lack of a proofreader. Certainly, Strength and Honour is a good enough set of rules made infinitely more accessible by the effort that has gone into its layout, and I felt that it was important to highlight this in the review. Now, it's not all bread, circuses and orgies. There are some things that not all wargamers will find to be acceptable within this rule set for their personal tastes, and at least should be aware of going in. I mentioned before about the tense experience of rolling for unit activation. Well, this could leave a salty taste in someone's mouth if they have a run of poor die rolls, especially if it really happens at the wrong time. Now, you can mitigate the chances of a freak bad result through the use of the command points I mentioned earlier, but these do run out, and seeing as how most rolls on a singular d6, you will be able to calculate exactly how much fate has screwed you over, and that knowledge does not make the pill easier to swallow. In the game of fantasy football, there is some solace in just shrugging and saying, that's Blood Bowl, but I'm not certain this attitude translates to the epic battle simulation. At least Ancients wargaming isn't known for being dominated by the tournament scene. Oh no. Oh no. Well, another obvious and oft-repeated criticism I hear is that 6mm is too small for serious wargaming, the pieces becoming more akin to tokens than miniatures. Well, the 2mm featured within the Strength and Honour rulebook is likely to magnify all of this exponentially. Of course, as is stated elsewhere, this works with units based as elements, and as such, Strength and Honour can be used in any scale, but even if we go with this rule set being 2mm only, you are looking at the overall effect of an ancient army arrayed before us. Complaining about not being able to see the eyes on a 2mm scale model is like complaining about not being able to see the boobs on the Mona Lisa. They aren't supposed to be on display. But nonetheless, there remains those who adhere to their one true scale, and if that for them is a larger one, say 25 to 28mm, then they may find squaring the big picture perspective of these rules a bit difficult with their personal collection. In a similar vein to the issue of scale, grid-based wargaming comes in for some stick, and I find myself sympathising with this a little bit more. Not for square grids myself, I actually find it feels more like I'm a general planning manoeuvres on a map, but I have a similar distaste for hex-based terrain. I just can't unsee hexes regardless of any efforts to dress them up. Fortunately for Strength and Honour, grids are far easier to hide these days, and complement the fact that ancient wargames armies tend to operate in a collection of squares and rectangles already. I do hear that some consider a grid-based wargame to be a board game by default, as if that somehow makes all other arguments invalid, but that isn't factually true. It's a miniatures wargame, whether you like it or not. Having a lot of board gaming friends myself, I know that it would not be considered a board game by them either, even if it was presented in a box with a fold-out gridded board and printed units. They would curl their lip, stroke their baddie beard, and denounce it as a wargame, and they would be right to do so. But nonetheless, the presence of a grid on a gaming surface is still of novelty and not one that everybody will find welcome. The final criticism I will level at Strength and Honour is one I noticed, and it feels like low-hanging fruit even to me. It certainly is not something that betrays a lack of creativity on the part of the author, but several of the army lists do appear to be close facsimiles of the others, particularly when it comes to the various barbarian peoples. Although you'll see this exact issue in any Ancients rule set, especially if they've been researched properly, the additional little bit of abstraction present in Strength and Honour will make them possibly just a little too similar. That said, don't let this little criticism alone put you off. There's still plenty of difference between a Roman legion, a pike phalanx and a barbarian horde to give you very different command experiences. Regardless of the above, Strength and Honour isn't getting away without a recommendation from me. For those looking for a representation of Army Command, it does what it sets out to do, covering for some of the shortcomings of the old DBA/DBM rules, whilst not just taking a newer, more dynamic set and trying to play it with loads of models. On the subject of models, this really isn't an expensive game to collect figures for. All of mine are 3D prints, and there are some specialised pieces available from manufacturers written in the book. I look forward to hopefully seeing it branch into more interesting periods of history to me personally. For example, when the Roman manipular legions had to do the heavy lifting to become the premier Mediterranean power of ancient times, and some of the prior powers carving their empires across the known world. If you've seen this video and are interested in learning more, I'll link to the Two Fat Lardies playlist on this game in the description below. The battle report alone is great fun. Anyway, I'm Shieldwall100 and I hope you enjoyed this review. There are battle reports for other ancient wargames rules on this channel already if you'd like to see what I can do in a modded space. Maybe I shall see you next time.